Hello everyone. Today's video is about famous Hollywood celebrities who went to jail and what reason behind that. Let's subscribe our channel and press the bell icon. Sugar Ray Leonard was sentenced to 1 year of probation for domestic abuse, though he never served time behind bars. YNW Melly is currently serving life in prison after being convicted of double murder. Bobby Shmurda was sentenced to 7 years in prison for conspiracy and weapons charges, but was released early for good behavior. Chief Keef was jailed for 2 months due to a probation violation related to his earlier legal troubles. Boozy Badass, formerly known as Lil Boozy, served 5 years in prison for drug possession before his release. Kodak Black was sentenced to 3 years for gun charges, but was pardoned by President Donald Trump in 2021. XXXTentacion was sentenced to 1 year of probation for assault and robbery before his untimely death. Tekashi 69 served 2 years in prison for racketeering. Jussie Smollett was sentenced to 150 days in jail for staging a hate crime hoax, though he maintains his innocence. Danny Masterson, the That 70s Show actor, was sentenced to 30 years in prison after being convicted of rape. Roman Polanski, the film director, fled the United States before serving his sentence for rape. Harvey Weinstein, the disgraced Hollywood producer, is serving 23 years in prison for rape and sexual assault. Kelly was sentenced to 30 years in prison for sex crimes, including child exploitation and human trafficking. Bill Cosby served 3 years in prison for sexual assault. David Cassidy, the Partridge Family star, was jailed for 2 days after being convicted of DUI multiple times. Bobby Brown spent 30 days in jail for DUI and battery charges. DMX, the late rapper, was sentenced to 1 year in prison for fraud and assault. 50 Cent served 6 months in a correctional boot camp for drug dealing early in his career. Fat Joe was jailed for 4 months due to tax evasion after failing to pay over $3 million in taxes. Ja Rule served 2 years in prison for gun possession and tax evasion. T.I. Clifford Harris was sentenced to 1 year in prison for illegal firearm possession. Martin Sheen was jailed for 7 days after being arrested multiple times for trespassing during protests. Ezra Miller received 1 year of probation after being charged with assault and harassment. Jason Mitchell, known for his role in Straight Outta Compton, served 1 year in jail for drugs and assault charges. Lane Garrison was sentenced to 40 months in prison for vehicular manslaughter after a drunk driving accident. Don King, the legendary boxing promoter, served 4 years for manslaughter in the 1960s. Stephen Baldwin received 5 years of probation for tax evasion, avoiding jail time. Suge Knight is currently serving
Tom
28
Sizemore
years
served
in
16
prison for
months
manslaughter
in prison for
after
drug
a
possession
hit-and-run incident
and multiple parole
Tupac
violations.
Shakur spent 9 months
Ryan
in
O'Neal
prison
spent
for
1
assault
day
and
in
sexual
jail due to
abuse
drug
before his
charges.
release on bail. Paul Rubens, known as Pee Wee Herman, served 20 days for indecent exposure. Chris Brown was jailed for 108 days for assault, including probation violations related to his attack on Rihanna. Lindsay Lohan served just 84 minutes in jail for DUI and theft due to overcrowding. Mel Gibson was jailed for 3 days following a DUI arrest and making anti-Semitic remarks. Mickey Rourke spent 4 days in jail on domestic violence charges, though they were later dismissed. Vince Vaughn served 2 days in jail after being involved in a bar fight. Shia LaBeouf was arrested for disorderly conduct and served 1 day in jail. Charlie Sheen spent 30 days in jail for domestic violence following an altercation with his ex-wife. Phil Spector, the famous music producer, was sentenced to 19 years in prison for murder before his death. Mike Tyson, the former boxing champion, served 3 years in prison for rape before being released on parole. O.J. Simpson was sentenced to 9 years in prison for armed robbery, unrelated to his earlier murder trial. Danny Trejo, before becoming a Hollywood star, served 11 years in prison for drugs and robbery. Sean Penn was sentenced to 33 days in jail for assaulting a photographer in the late 1980s. Kiefer Sutherland, known for 24, served 48 days in jail for DUI. Christian Slater spent 59 days in jail for assault and drug possession. Wesley Snipes served 3 years in prison for tax evasion after failing to pay millions in taxes. Tim Allen was sentenced to 2 years in prison for drug trafficking in the 1970s before turning his life around. Mark Wahlberg, before becoming a famous actor, served 45 days in jail for assault as a teenager. Robert Downey Jr. spent 1 year in jail for drug-related offenses before making his Hollywood comeback.